Hi, we just want to do a little quick sound test. If you guys can hear me, would you just hit the little, there's a hand there, just hit that and that's raising your hand so I know that you guys can hear me. Okay, great. All right, we're going to wait just a couple more minutes to let other people join us and then we'll get started. Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome everyone to the World Relief webinar. We are going to take questions at the end of each section, and there's 3 sections. And the way we're going to do it, we have so many participants, 77 people registered for this webinar, and that's great. So we're going to take questions in writing only. So you'll stay muted the whole time. You won't be able to ask questions using the audio, but you can type. You'll see on your bar on the right-hand side, there's a questions bar that you can type a question kind of in a chat form. So we'll take those questions at the end of each section. Or if you want to raise, if you're having trouble with that and you want to raise your hand, we can use that function too, and then we could unmute you just for that question. So we'll review that at the end of this first section. Hold on one second. I'm having a technical problem. Oh, there we go. Okay. So the title of our webinar is Serving Undocumented Individuals in Your Community. And my name is Keidre Metzger, and I'm our senior attorney for our religious worker program here at World Relief headquarters in Baltimore. And I manage all of our religious worker cases and the hotline that we recently started with the church, with the Wesleyan Church. So we're going to just start off with defining a couple of important terms that are going to be used a lot in this presentation that are important to know as we move forward. And then we'll start with these, we'll talk about what they mean, and then we're going to talk about some of the hurdles that immigrants face and how to get lawful immigrant status in the United States. So our first term that you need to know is non-immigrant. And you'll hear of non-immigrant visas, and these visas allow someone to be admitted to the United States for a temporary period of time. So these would be student visas, religious worker visas, R1 visas, tourist visas. You have a specific purpose. You can only come to do certain things. So if you're a tourist, you can only come to be a tourist. You can't work while you're here. If you're here to be a student, you have to be a student. You're generally not allowed to work. So those kinds of visas are limited to a specific time and a specific activity. An immigrant visa is a visa you would apply for if you wanted to be a permanent resident, have a green card in the United States. And so those are not limited to a specific time and allow you to move towards citizenship. Immigration status is something that is granted upon admission to the United States. So that can happen either at a port of entry, like at an airport. If you enter with a visa at the airport, then the officers there will stamp a white card in your passport called the I-94 card, and that designation that's on that card will give you your immigration status. You can also get that if you apply for a benefit from the government and then they send you a letter that says you now have an R1 visa or R1 status or something like that. So that immigration status continues for the period of time that you're allowed to stay in the U.S., and they put that on the I-94 card, and I'm going to show you an example of that here. So this is the white card that I was talking about. Someone comes into the country with an F1 visa. They get this white card, and you can see in the upper right-hand corner it's been stamped with a date, and it has a classification F1. So that's the date that they entered, and then it tells what kind of visa they have. Now some of these will have a date where it says DS, that means duration of status. That person can stay here as long as they're studying. There's no end date. But a lot of people will actually have a date on that card. That date is what matters. There's a lot of confusion between a visa and a passport and immigration status. The visa, that's the sort of sticker in the passport, does not let you know how much time you have to be in the U.S. The date on this card is what matters, and so this is a really important piece of documentation. So a visa is something that's issued by a U.S. consulate at an embassy abroad. It's issued by the State Department. You have to have it. I like to think of the visa as a ticket for travel. If you're outside of the United States, you have to have a ticket in order to get in, and so you need your plane ticket, but you also need an immigration ticket, and that's what the visa is. A visa allows you to travel to the border of the United States. It doesn't automatically guarantee that you're going to be able to enter the United States. When you get to the border, the Department of Homeland Security is the one that makes the decision about whether or not you can actually come inside the country, and then they'll give you this card. And this card is what will tell you how long you can be here and what your status is. The visa is the thing that gets you to the border. And here's an example of a visa. So this is usually just a sticker that's inside the passport, and it's your ticket to the border. Another term that's important to know is grounds of inadmissibility, and these are the reasons why someone might not be allowed to get a visa at the embassy or to apply for an immigration benefit once they're inside the United States. So some of the grounds, the most common grounds of inadmissibility, things that can keep you from obtaining lawful immigration status, certain crimes. If you entered the U.S. without inspection, so you crossed the border secretly, or if you violated previous immigration status, let's say you came in on a tourist visa and that stamp here on this I-94 card where it says DS, instead of saying that, it actually said a certain date, like January 1st, 2006, and you didn't go home when that date came about, or you didn't apply for another immigration benefit, and so that would be a violation, and that would end up being a ground of inadmissibility for you later on. Another important term is a ground of deportability. So this is for somebody who's already here, they're in status, they're here. These are reasons why you can be asked to leave. You can be removed from the United States. And there's lots of different reasons. Some are crimes. But this applies to everyone. Even green card holders are subject to the grounds of deportability. So even a green card holder can be removed from the U.S. if they violate certain rules. Usually before this happens, you would be able to get a hearing before an immigration judge. So we kind of talked about this one already, admission and inspection. So each individual entering the U.S. has to be inspected and admitted by Customs and Border Protection, and they're an agency of the Department of Homeland Security. So just because you're inside the country doesn't mean that you were admitted to the country. So you have to go through that inspection process. So we say entering without inspection, we call that EWI, and that's where you cross the border without being inspected. And so now that person would be subject to the grounds of inadmissibility and deportability. So who's involved in all of this? The legislative branch makes our immigration laws. The Department of State issues visas. And the Department of Homeland Security does three things. It patrols the border, it processes immigration applications, and it enforces immigration laws. And then the Department of Justice is where we find our immigration courts and the Board of Immigration Appeals. So you can see there's a lot of people involved, and they don't always talk to each other, which makes this process even more complicated. So our immigration laws, like I said, are written by the legislative branch. They've written the Immigration and Nationality Act. The Department of Homeland Security then takes that broader law and turns it into specific rules for specific immigration benefits and applications. So the legislative branch might say, okay, we want people to be able to apply for green cards, and then the Department of Homeland Security would tell you which form you have to use in order to apply for that. And the Department of State uses another document called the Foreign Affairs Manual. So we're going to talk, now we're going to take those terms and we're going to talk about the basics of immigration law, the Immigration 101. How does somebody enter the United States? How does somebody obtain lawful immigration status? So there's several hurdles to that. The requirements for an immigration benefit, those grounds that I talked about of inadmissibility and deportability, the cost of the process itself, inspection at the border, and then even once somebody's here, maintaining their immigration status. So we're going to go through each one of those, and then at the end of this section we'll have questions. So hurdle number one, the first question you have to answer for anybody who wants to enter the United States or gain lawful immigration status is, do I qualify for any immigration benefit? So there's three broad categories. One is the non-immigrant visas. We talked about that term earlier. A non-immigrant visa is a temporary visa for a specific purpose, and those run all the way from A all the way to V. So there's an A visa, a B visa, a C visa, D, E, F, and on. So if somebody wants to visit the United States, they could start with that long list from A to V and see, do I qualify for any of these visas? I'll be using the R1 visa most of the time in this presentation as an example, and that's the religious worker visa. So somebody who wanted to qualify for that visa would have specific requirements, like they have to be a member of the denomination, they have to be coming to work as a religious worker. Every visa has those kinds of requirements, so that's the first hurdle. The second broad category is permanent residence, and these are the immigrant visas. These are the visas that will lead to a green card. The non-immigrant visas do not lead to a green card. First you have to get this immigrant visa through either a family member, an employer, the diversity lottery, or if you're an asylee or a refugee. Those are the four most common ways that people are able to obtain a green card. Or you may be able to get lawful status through a special program like temporary protected status, cancellation of removal, or something called deferred action. But this is the first question that has to be answered. If the person doesn't qualify for anything on this list in any of these three broad categories, then there's no way for them to enter the U.S. or to gain lawful immigration status. So the second hurdle is inadmissibility. So let's say the individual wants to apply for a religious worker visa and they meet all the requirements of that visa. They've been a member of the denomination, they're a minister, they've met the church they want to come work for, can afford to pay them, they've met all the requirements, they've filled out the forms, they're ready to go. But if they fall within the grounds of inadmissibility, that can prevent them from applying for that benefit. So the most common grounds of inadmissibility are criminal grounds, economic, immigration law, and immigration law violations. Those are the most common. So if somebody has any crimes in their background, certain crimes, if they've previously been inside the United States or are currently inside the United States without lawful status, these are things that can prevent them from successfully submitting the application for an immigration benefit. So this is the second hurdle that somebody has to overcome. And sometimes there are waivers, a special form and process where you can seek forgiveness basically for some of these common grounds. You can ask immigration to ignore those things and go ahead and grant the visa or grant the immigration benefit. So in limited circumstances, there are waivers available for individuals that will help them jump over this hurdle. So this is usually where most people get stuck, is here on number 2. And the problem that people face is that they're not able to change their status inside the United States because of these grounds of inadmissibility. So they're required to leave the country, and in doing so often trigger a bar that prevents them from applying for any immigration benefits for up to 10 years. So this is a difficult hurdle. The third hurdle, so now you've applied, you've met the requirements, you've got your paperwork ready, you've satisfied the grounds of inadmissibility, you've overcome those, and now you have all these costs. So you have the fees for the applications, you have attorney's costs, travel expenses, and sometimes the benefit itself requires certain evidence of finances. The student visa, for example, you have to prove that you can pay for school. So that is another hurdle that an individual would have to jump over. The fourth hurdle is just the process itself, knowing where to submit forms. The one form can be sent to several different places, and so just even knowing where to submit your form and getting it to the right place can be a big issue. The amount of evidence that's required for the particular immigration benefit, there's just so much that's required, so much paperwork and evidence that they want to see, that can be a problem. Processing delays. I have religious worker visas that are approved within 3 months, and I have others that are still pending after 8 or 9 months. That's very frustrating for people. Requests for more evidence. Sometimes no matter how much evidence you provide, immigration will ask for more. Sometimes individuals don't receive their notices or letters at their home, and they miss out on important deadlines because they didn't receive their mail. And then an application can be denied. The fifth hurdle is inspection. So let's use the example of an R1 visa holder who's going to come, who's got their ticket. They've got their ticket and their passport. They get on the plane. They fly to Baltimore International Airport, and then they still have to be inspected by a Customs and Border Patrol agent, and that agent can turn them away if they don't like what they see. There's something about the visa that they don't like, or they have suspicions about the individual's travels or intentions when they're here. They can just deny them entry. So here you've gone through, you've met the requirements for the immigration benefit, you've overcome the inadmissibility, you've paid the fees, you've gotten through the process, and at hurdle number 5, you're knocked out of the race, and you can't get in, and you are not allowed a hearing before a judge. You're just turned back at the airport and asked to leave. So that's another hurdle. The final hurdle is, okay, you've made it here, you got through inspection, you're inside the United States, and it's just really important to understand all of the requirements of the particular immigration benefit, the particular immigration status, again on that I-94 card, that white card, because if you don't maintain your status, you don't follow all of the rules, then you can fall under these grounds of deportability and you can be removed from the country. And sometimes something as simple as traveling can violate your status. Sometimes if certain applications are pending and you leave, immigration will just cancel them. That's one issue that people face. And so it's really important that when somebody applies for an immigration benefit, that they understand fully what it takes to get the benefit, but also what it takes to keep that benefit. And I think there's often a lot of misunderstanding. For example, with the religious worker visa, you have to stay with the church that hired you originally unless the new church files a whole new application packet for you. So an individual may have a religious worker visa, they may be here, and a church in Texas may have brought them here to be their employer, but then a church in Colorado would like to hire them, and so they just switch churches without applying for a new religious worker visa, and that's a violation of that status, and that will now make them unlawful, and they no longer have a valid immigration status just from that one action. So immigration law is complex, and it's really important to seek counsel of immigration specialists and attorneys before making any decisions about changing jobs or traveling or any of that when you're in the United States. So that's the end of this section. So why don't we see if there's any questions? You can either hit the hand raise button or you can type a question if you have any. Okay, looks like we're okay so far. So I'm going to go ahead and move on to this second section, church liability, myths and facts. And we run a couple of hotlines here, one for the Wesleyan Church and one for the Church of the Nazarene. And these are the questions I'm going to go over now are frequently asked questions that we get here in our office from church leaders. Oh wait, we do have one question. Okay, so I'm sorry, I'm just going to pause for a second and go ahead and answer a couple of questions. One question was, can you apply for and get an R1 after entering the country? Absolutely. But again, you have to start with hurdle one. Do you qualify for an R1? Do you meet the requirements? If you do qualify for the R1 and you're inside the country, do you fall within any grounds of inadmissibility? So the first question is, what is your current status? So if somebody is here on a student visa and they want to switch to an R1, that's fine, that's allowable. If somebody has no lawful status currently, they're undocumented, they don't have a lawful immigration status, then they would not be allowed to apply for the R1 from inside the United States because they would fall underneath that hurdle number 2, the grounds of inadmissibility. They have violated immigration rules, and so they're not allowed. So they're asked to leave and go apply for that R1 at an embassy abroad. Unfortunately, if that individual leaves the country, they will trigger a 3 to 10-year bar, which will prevent them from applying for an R1 or any other immigration benefit for up to 10 years. So that individual may be in a very difficult position and have a big dilemma in front of them. Do I stay under the radar, or do I travel out of the country and trigger a 10-year bar? Can a pastor serve as a chaplain for another company at the same time? Absolutely. If a pastor wants to work for 2 churches, that's fine. If they want to be a chaplain for a religious organization and a pastor for another church, that's fine. But both entities, both organizations have to file applications for that individual. So the form number is called the I-129 form. Wherever they want to be a chaplain, that organization has to file an I-129 form, and if they're at another location, that church or other religious organization also has to file an I-129. So if I came in to work for the church in Texas, I have to stay and work for the church in Texas unless somebody else files a petition on my behalf, and then I can either switch or add in an additional employer. So then there's another question. Can you define a religious worker, youth pastor, children's worker, church staff, translator? It has to be a religious job. So think about it. So a youth pastor would be great, a music minister. Some churches even have worship arts. But these have to be, let's use, for example, a school. If you have a religious school, Christian school, for example, and you want to hire somebody to be a math teacher in that school, immigration won't let somebody get a religious worker visa to be a math teacher in a Christian school unless knowledge of the doctrine and church practices is essential to the performance of that job. So in order to be a math teacher in that school, in order to teach math correctly in that school, you have to know the creed and the doctrine and understand the denomination. If that's true and there's a way to prove that, then that will qualify as a religious job, as a religious worker. So it's really thinking about what is the purpose of the job, what are the functions of the job, and is knowledge of the creed and doctrine essential to performing that particular job. So janitors are not allowed, church fundraisers are not allowed, things like that. Does R1 status require full-time employment? No, R1 status does not. You can be part-time. It's just 20 hours is the requirement for the religious worker visa. Okay, is someone on an F2, so a child of a student visa who is now an adult? Okay, so the question is, so a student visa doesn't have an end. You can as long as you're still a student and you're studying, you can continue to prolong that. Like you can do your bachelor's and your master's and your doctorate all on the same student visa. This person's asking about the children of that individual. Those children can come with their parent. Once they turn 21, they no longer qualify for that visa, so they need to start thinking about that when the child's 18, 19. They need to start thinking about what's the next step for that child. Do they need to get their own student visa? But once they're 21, they no longer qualify. Yeah, why don't we take a break, and then I'm going to go back to a lot of these questions at the end, and we'll try to answer some more. Okay, so the law that decides which foreign nationals can enter the United States and what they can do when they're here, that's called the Immigration and Nationality Act. That's the most important law for us, in exploring immigration issues. That's the law that governs. There are some state laws right now that are being, put forth and being challenged in court that have not been resolved fully. So there may be some individual state laws that may come into play. But what I'm going to be talking about is the INA, the Immigration and Nationality Act. So how does someone become undocumented? So we've talked about this a little bit already. You can enter without inspection. You overstay the expiration date on the I-94 card without applying for an additional benefit or an extension. You violate the terms of an immigration status, like the R1 worker who moved to a different church without getting a new application. For family-based applications, if you get divorced or someone dies before the application process is completed, sometimes that can cause someone to fall out of status. And if somebody is a victim of domestic violence or crime or fraud, sometimes that will end up leading them to be undocumented. So in presenting this slide, I just want people to understand that I think people think of undocumented individuals as people who came across the border without inspection, and that's not always the case. And sometimes people fall out of status by mistake. They don't intend to. Maybe fraudulent attorneys or other immigration folks will file applications that the person isn't eligible for or take advantage of them in some way, and they'll end up undocumented. So every undocumented individual has their own story. It's often they're very different from each other. So can an undocumented individual receive ordination? Again, the INA does not prohibit ordination or the credentialing of undocumented individuals. So as far as the Immigration and Nationality Act is concerned, churches are not going to get in trouble for ordaining or credentialing undocumented individuals. Churches make their own decisions, policy decisions on this, but they're not prohibited from doing so by the government. It also doesn't prohibit undocumented foreign nationals from owning property, opening a bank account, volunteering, any of these things, or bringing a civil lawsuit. If a woman is a victim of domestic violence, she can get a court order of protection. She can file a lawsuit. She can bring criminal prosecution, charges against the abuser. Undocumented immigrants have access to all of those rights. Exactly. Thanks. Sometimes banks make it difficult to open a bank account, so you may have to have a social security card, things like that. But the INA does not prohibit that. Prohibit undocumented individuals from accessing those things. Does a church have to verify the immigration status of church volunteers? No. Volunteers who do work without any expectation of compensation are not employees, and so they can volunteer. A church is not obligated to check their status to have people working in, people volunteering in the church. And any expenses that a volunteer spends out of their own pocket. So if they travel to an event and all the volunteers who are traveling to that event are receiving reimbursement, then that individual can also be reimbursed. If they spend money on food, if they buy bagels for the church Bible study, that can be reimbursed. All of that is allowable because it's not considered compensation. It's simply reimbursement of out-of-pocket expenses. Does our church have a duty to report undocumented individuals? Absolutely not. The INA does not prohibit association with those who do not have a lawful immigration status, nor does it require U.S. citizens or others to report the presence of an individual who's undocumented. Churches are free to minister and serve the undocumented. They can serve whomever they choose. And they are also able to provide them with access to their food pantries or any other emergency services that the church may offer, any other programs, youth programs, Sunday school, any of that. That a church would offer to anybody, like a deacon's fund or any of that, that they don't have to check immigration status in order to offer those benefits. Now, some churches may have special grants from the federal government that they get, a church that has a special separate 501c3 or some other special programs where they're getting special funding that may have its own requirements. But in general, this is not an issue. Church is not going to get in trouble for having undocumented individuals participating in the life of their church. Can we employ an undocumented individual as a pastor in our church? So this is the only prohibition, is that you cannot hire anyone who does not have permission to work in the United States. So undocumented individuals can volunteer, they can be a part of the life and body of your church, but you cannot employ them. And if employers do this, if they knowingly hire someone who's undocumented, then they can face fines and, in real egregious situations, criminal consequences. So it's important, and hiring isn't just putting people on payroll. It might be coming up with anything that can be considered compensation from the IRS, for example, might be considered hiring. So even if someone's not on payroll and receiving a payroll check, if they're receiving cash, anything like that, if the IRS would consider it income or compensation for services rendered, then it could be considered employment. So it's just something to keep in mind. So we're at the end of that section, so I'm just going to see if we have any more questions here. Okay, so here's a question. This is about an R1 who is someone who is a student. Okay, yeah, so for specifics, so there's a question about a student, someone who's applied for an R1, and from Dwayne. Why don't we talk about that after on the phone, because I think that would be a good call for the hotline, so I can really answer your specific question. Okay, so there's another, can you apply for a visa if you enter illegally but don't have any criminal record? So again, the first hurdle, the first question is, do I qualify for any immigration benefits? So a non-immigrant visa, an immigrant visa, or a special program. All of those programs and benefits have their own requirements, but all of them are subject to the grounds of inadmissibility. So if somebody entered the United States without inspection, they would fall under that second hurdle of the grounds of inadmissibility and would not be able to apply for that benefit. Now again, sometimes there's waivers, and sometimes special programs have their own special exceptions. Like for Violence Against Women Act, there's some exceptions there for women who maybe are out of status. So sometimes there may be a special program, but in general, if you're out of status, it's very difficult to go from being out of status to difficult to overcome those grounds of inadmissibility. Is there any way around the bar, the 3- and 10-year bar? Well, so we're hoping that comprehensive immigration reform is going to be a way around the bar. That's something that we're very hopeful is going to pass this year, and we don't know exactly what the ramifications of that will be for people, but we're we're very hopeful that that's going to solve that problem. Right now, there aren't a lot of ways around the bar. It depends on what you're applying for. Sometimes there are waivers that allow you to have that bar forgiven, but it just depends on what benefit you're applying for. So that's again why that first question is, do I qualify for anything? And then if you do, you have to look at the specific requirements of that immigration benefit, and there may be built-in exceptions or there may be a waiver available under that particular benefit. Are pastors allowed to be bivocational? So pastors on an R1 visa would not be allowed to be bivocational. So a pastor who's brought here on an R1 visa, who comes on an R1 visa and is working as a pastor for a church, they wouldn't then be able to go work in a cabinet making shop or, you know, as a mechanic or as a lawyer or anything else. They have to stay at that church working as a minister, unless, again, another church applied for them and they wanted to work for two churches at the same time. But you're not allowed to carry on secular jobs while you're on an R1 visa. Now, if a pastor wanted to switch from the R1 to an H1B visa and work for the secular job, and that might be a different scenario. But if you've come here to work as a pastor, you have the R1, unless you change to some other benefit, some other visa, you have to stay doing that religious work and are not allowed to take on secular employment. Is it wise for a district to apply for the pastor and allow him to work at different churches in the district? Well, and we can, and this is from Max, and Max, we can talk about this on the phone too, but it depends on who the employer is. If the district is the employer and the district is assigning this person to different locations, that's a little bit different, and that might be allowed, but we want to talk about the specifics a little bit more. Right. Sorry, I'm just looking through some of these questions here real quick. Oh, someone asked a question, can I officiate weddings for undocumented people? There's nothing in the Immigration and Nationality Act that prohibits you from marrying undocumented individuals. So legally, there's no prohibition against that. I don't know what the Wesleyan policies are on that, but as far as immigration law is concerned, you are not placing yourself at risk or placing the church in any sort of a situation where you're going to be bringing liability on the church. You're absolutely allowed to do that. Somebody had a question about E-Verify. Yeah, we can talk. Maybe we should talk about that's a little bit involved. So Ed, why don't you give me a call, and we can talk about that a little bit more. But right, as an employer, if that's something that's required, then you know you have to use whatever's required of all employers. The church has to follow whatever's required for all employers. So like if it's a requirement for Pizza Hut, then it's a requirement for the church. So but anyway. Is giving an undocumented pastor a home to stay in considered employment? I mean, these are hard questions. Well, I think that that's tricky. That's a hard one because I think sometimes it could be, depending on who you talk to, it could be seen as compensation. You're giving them a home so that they will be a pastor, so it's in exchange for their services. If it's more of a benevolence type situation, then that's different. Yeah, it's complex, and we would have to talk about the specifics of the particular situation, but yeah, it could be considered compensation. So that's the more conservative answer. If an undocumented immigrant has an LLC, can a church use their services as an independent contractor? Right, so the INA says that you cannot knowingly hire someone as your employee. If someone is a contractor, an independent contractor, they're not your employee. so that rule does not apply. So let's say I hire somebody to paint my house. I'm not going to check their immigration status when I hire them to paint my house because they're not my employee. So that's the difference. Independent contractors are a little bit different. But again, if you want to talk about the specifics of a particular situation, that would probably be good for you to give us a call just to make sure that we understand the whole situation. Right. Somebody had a question about background checks. There is a way to do background checks for undocumented individuals, and I can send something out through Wayne Macbeth about that, about how to do that. Another Willow Creek church figured out a way to do it, and it's been really helpful for them. So I can send out that information. Okay, so I'm going to take this one last question, and we'll go through this section, and then we'll have more questions at the end. Somebody asked, if someone's on an R1 visa, can they become a citizen, and after how many years? So here's how it would usually work. If I'm here on an R1 visa, that's a non-immigrant visa, right? It's one of those A through V visas. So I'm only allowed to be here for a specific time and doing specific activities. So if I want to get a green card and then become a citizen, I need to figure out how to get from that religious worker visa to those immigrant visas, because the immigrant visas are the ones that lead to green cards. So for religious workers, there is one called the I-360 Special Immigrant Religious Worker Visa. So an individual can switch from the R1 visa to that I-360 immigrant visa. So they'd have to apply for a new visa, and they'd switch to that one. And then after they had a green card for 5 years, that's the general rule. There is a special exception for missionaries, but in general, you have to have a green card for 5 years before you can become a citizen. So then they would go from the R1 to the immigrant visa, have the green card for 5 years, and then they would be able to apply for citizenship. So it's kind of a 3-step process. Non-immigrant visa, immigrant visa, citizenship. Or you could also start at immigrant visa if you qualified for one directly, and then go from immigrant visa, green card, to citizenship. Okay? Okay, our last section is called Now What? So how can a church help find out if there are any immigration options for individuals in their community or their church? And then what can they do if there is no way to resolve the immigration situation? So the first step is World Relief and the Wesleyan Church have a partnership where you can contact our office for any of the questions that we've been discussing or any of the issues we've been discussing here. You should feel free to contact us at the number here or at the website listed here on this slide. And you can talk to us about these things, and we can either help you by directly representing you and taking the case as your immigration attorney, or we can refer you to someone who can help you if it's not something that we can take. And we'll try to help you get connected to somebody who can actually take the case. So this is a good place to start by calling us. And we'll have you fill out an intake form, and then we'll have an immigration attorney. We'll provide an analysis of your case. So don't tell someone to leave the United States to fix their immigration status. Because as we talked about, the bar is triggered when someone leaves the U.S. And I think there's misunderstanding a lot of times that people give this advice with great intentions, and it has sometimes very difficult results and consequences. So I would say don't tell somebody to leave without talking to an immigration attorney first and making sure that the person doesn't have any other options, they don't qualify for a waiver or something else. Don't try to help someone with an immigration form without talking to an immigration attorney. This is really important. I run into situations all the time where pastors and other people, out of great hearts and wanting to help people, and sometimes even out of desperation, will help someone file a form or file a form on their behalf. And this law is so complex. It's one of the most complex areas compared with tax law. And there's every little fact, every nuance can greatly affect the outcome of the case. And so it's just really important to check with somebody first before you help somebody. And the last thing is, don't believe that just because there isn't an immigration solution that you haven't been able to be helpful to that person. Because one problem with immigration is that there aren't enough legal service providers. There aren't enough people out there who can help. And so there are a lot of people out there who want to do harm and who want to take advantage of people, charge them a lot of money for things they don't qualify for, and there's a lot of abuse. And so the most important thing is that the individual understands their circumstances. Even if it means there's no option right now to fix their status, that information can actually give them a lot of power and can help them not fall into some of these situations where they're taken advantage of. So I think that it's a great service for a church to be able to offer to help someone find out the answer, the final 100% truth about their circumstances. That is really helpful for people. So again, this whole idea of unauthorized practice of law. So helping somebody fill out a form and filing immigration forms on their behalf is considered unauthorized practice of law. And immigration is really cracking down on this. So one, you can get into trouble. Two, if the individual gets upset and decides to sue, they're going to sue the denomination, probably not you directly, the person who did it. So it puts the church at risk. It also exposes the client to potential harm. I had a case where somebody was just trying to be helpful, and it was this older couple who'd been in the United States a long time on a religious worker visa, and a simple mistake in an application has now landed this couple without status. And it was something that was completely preventable and didn't have to happen, and now they don't have status, and now they face the bar if they leave, and they're stuck, and they can't be employed. And it's a really heartbreaking thing in that the individual who helped them, he feels terrible, So they're sad, he's sad. It's a really difficult situation. So just to play it safe, get in touch with us or get in touch with an immigration attorney who's reputable and knowledgeable, and don't help people fill out forms. Sometimes in some states, even just filling out a form on someone's behalf can be considered an unauthorized practice of law. So it's just really, really, really important. If you want to fill out forms and practice immigration law, then you can, this last bullet here, you can become recognized and accredited by the Board of Immigration Appeals. And we can help you with that. So if you want to open up an immigration legal services, office in your church, or want to go down that road, then that's something we should talk about. And that's an option if you feel like that's a ministry you want to provide. But only in that case should individuals be giving legal advice. So one thing that churches can do is help individuals prepare for comprehensive immigration reform. And the big piece of comprehensive immigration reform is going to be documentation. So identity documentation. Individuals need to start gathering birth certificates, passports, driver's license, any kind of proof of their identity. And churches can help with that. Right now, today, individuals can be collecting these things and getting ready. Proof of physical presence, medical records, utility bills, marriage certificates, bank statements, anything that you have that proves that you've been in the United States for a particular period of time, which we don't know what the parameters are going to be yet, but start collecting proof that you've been living in the United States, leases, mortgages, anything like that, and that you've been paying taxes. That's another piece of this. So tax documents, also criminal history. You want to get a certified copy of any court dispositions, traffic violations, any sort of documentation of your criminal history. Any encounter that you've had with an officer of the law should be documented and kept in a safe place. Anything about your prior immigration history, any visas you've been granted, I-94 cards, any correspondence between immigration and the individual should be kept and put in. All this stuff should be collected. One big piece that we're pretty sure is going to be included in comprehensive immigration reform is going to be an English component and a civics component. So we don't know for sure, but it would be good for individuals to get connected to some kind of ESL class and start working on English if that's an issue for them. And also you can go to this website that's listed here, and there's these civics questions. They're used for citizenship, but something like this may be used as part of comprehensive immigration reform, so it doesn't hurt to review those questions and start thinking about civics. And so these are things that a church can do. So if somebody doesn't have an immigration option, they can start preparing for immigration reform because they may likely benefit under that, and getting all this documentation together now is only going to make that process go more quickly. The other thing that you can do is preparing for removal from the United States. So I know people live in fear, and this is really difficult, but I think that it's important to prepare just in case someone were to be detained. So there needs to be a family safety plan. And that would look like, what are we going to do if let's say it's parents, if one parent is detained or removed, if both parents are detained and removed, who's going to pick the kids up from school? Who's going to pay the bills? Where are all of our important documents? All of those kinds of pieces of information are really important. Biographic information for family members, information about children's favorite activities, you know, their favorite toy, their thing they sleep with, all of that needs to be in a plan just in case. It's not what people want to think about, but it's just really important, and I think takes some of the fear out of it if there's a plan in place. So you need to think about things like power of attorney, and then documents, photos, tax forms, immigration documents, bills that need to be paid. All of that needs to be in like an expandable file and kept in a kit. And there should be, I don't know how that. Well, I'll send something out through Wayne. There's actually a website that has a lot of this information in it that can help you develop these kits. So this is another thing a church can do is help people collect this kind of information and just have a plan, you know, and just kind of an emergency contact in case something were to happen. I think that's just an important thing to think about. So just some general resources, a state-by-state guide to driver's license requirements. Every state is different, and so the National Immigration Law Center has a guide that's really helpful. Rights, like what to do if you get stopped by the police. What are your rights? What are undocumented individuals' rights? What are immigrants' rights in general? The National Immigration Law Center has some great resources on that. Resources for getting accredited. We talked about before about being able to practice immigration law. You can go to our website for that. Private immigration attorneys, and then low-cost legal services. So if we're not able to take the case, immigrationlawhelp.org is a nice compilation of low-cost immigration specialists by state that might be able to help as well. So I'm going to answer a few more questions, and then for follow-up questions, I think the one requirement is just if an individual isn't a staff member of the Wesleyan Church or a pastor or district superintendent and they have an immigration issue, they just need to be connected to us, introduced to us by the pastor or by the district superintendent, and then we can continue working on their situation after that one-on-one, but just to make that initial introduction through a staff member of the church is important for our partnership. So you can reach us at this phone number and this email address, and we want our response time to be from the attorney to be within 24 to 48 hours after doing an analysis of the case. So I'm going to look at a couple of questions here. When people are in the 30 to 60 day waiting period, how long should they wait to check in? Okay, so somebody's asking a question about when you're waiting for an application to be processed, how do you know if you should inquire? Like, how much time should go by before you check to see, you know, what's happening with the case? So there's a couple of different things. On the USCIS website, immigration's website, they have like a check the status of your case button, and you can put your receipt number in there and you can check the status of your case. That, whatever shows up on that screen will give you a time frame. It will say you should receive a response within 30 or 60 days. Anytime that time frame goes by, you can call the national customer service line and inquire about the case. If it's gone over the processing time that they've given you on your receipt notice or on any piece of correspondence, so sometimes it's 60 days, sometimes it's longer than that, you can call the National Customer Service Center and they will find out what's going on with your case. And all of that information can be found on the USCIS website, which I don't have here. I can type that in. And then the other thing you can check on the USCIS website is the general processing times for a particular application. They have, if the application was mailed to California Service Center, they'll give you a list of all the types of applications and how long it's taking for each one of those to be processed. That's another way to check to see how long it takes. I'm going to add this here. So this is the USCIS website. Right here, www.uscis.gov. Is a church required to ask if a potential employee is legally here? No, the church isn't required to ask that specific question. What a church is required to do is fill out the I-9, right, in the employment documents. And so when you fill out the I-9 has, you know, the list of documents. I think it's like A and B on the back, and you have to have a certain number of documents from one column and a certain number of documents from the other column. As long as the individual is able to produce the documents from those columns and they don't look obviously fraudulent, you know, that's what you're required to do as an employer. So you don't have to specifically say, are you undocumented or do you have permission to work? But like when I started working at World Relief, I had to show what my Social Security card and my driver's license. And they saw those and they accepted them, and so that was enough for them. So that's all you're required to do as well. You're not required to be investigators. That's immigration's job, to enforce the laws. Can you contact World Relief via Skype? Absolutely. If sometimes people are more comfortable talking sort of, quote, face-to-face, and so we're happy to do a Skype conversation instead of by phone or by email if that's more comfortable. We also have services in Spanish, so you don't have to call and talk to me. Anna Santa Ana is our paralegal, and she speaks Spanish, and so we can do Skype calls in English or Spanish or whatever you're comfortable with, so just let us know. Okay, somebody asked, how important is having a GED going to be for comprehensive immigration reform? I haven't heard about that being a requirement. Have you? I haven't heard anything about an educational requirement for comprehensive immigration reform. So far, it's just been the English and civics component. For the DACA students and DREAM students. So. Right. So, I mean, I think if that's something that you're interested in pursuing anyway, and it's something that you're working towards, then I'd say, you know, continue working on that. It may be a component for people of a certain age, or I don't think it'll probably be a general requirement for everyone, but there may be situations, you know, especially for those individuals that qualified for DACA, deferred action for childhood arrivals, the big immigration benefit that kind of came out last year. Those individuals were all under 30 and had different requirements. So it could be that with comprehensive immigration reform, those individuals will have some special education requirements. So yeah, it's hard to, we don't know exactly what this law is going to bring. So right now it's a little bit of guessing. Okay. Yeah, so somebody's asking about just help with filing religious worker visas applications. Our office can help with that. We can represent you. That's our kind of our specialty is religious worker visas and R1 visas and questions related to that. So we're happy to help with those either through that initial consultation through our partnership, or we can actually sort of serve as your immigration attorneys in that case. So anybody who has a question came up about that, so feel free to give us a call on that. And you know, you can always, somebody was asking about, can I fill out that form at all? And I think if you're the hiring church, if you're the employer and you're trying to file an immigration petition, the religious worker petition, you absolutely can draft the form. You can fill out the form. It's just that it's really important. That's not an authorized practice of law because you're the employer. You're involved in the application, so you can fill that out. But it's just really important to have it looked at and you know, and checked over by a attorney. A resource that deals with history of immigration in the United States. There's lots of those. Yeah, let me, can you write that down? Right, there's a great website, welcomeinthestranger.com, deals with a lot of the statistics and a lot of sort of factual information about immigrants. So welcomeinthestranger.com. The USCIS also has some good stuff about history. You know, let me put something together because there's several resources on sort of history, Migration Policy Institute. So I'll put something together and send it out. Right, so somebody's asking about how to bring their family, once they have residence in the United States, how do they bring their family members to join them? So again, on hurdle number 1, that's the immigrant visa through family members, and we're happy to help with that. So if you want to give us a call or talk to us about the specifics of that case, we're happy to help with that. And it is possible for people who have green cards and people who are U.S. citizens to bring their wives and minor children to the U.S. to join them, and well, and all their children. But and U.S. citizens can also bring siblings and parents. So if you have questions about that, please just feel free to call us. Okay, somebody's asking about something about the, I think what I was just talking about the deferred action for childhood arrivals. If the parents, right, why don't you give me a call on that and we can talk about the specifics because it's difficult for me to answer that just from the question. Okay, so here's a question, a more general question. Is it possible to apply for citizenship before the 5 years of residence have expired? Yes, you can. There's a couple of different situations where you can apply for citizenship before the 5 years. If you marry a U.S. citizen, there's some exceptions for missionaries. There's also, if you're in the military, there's a 3-year requirement, so that's a little bit different for individuals. And then if you are actually allowed to mail your application 90 days before your 5th year anniversary, so it's really 4 years and 9 months is when you can send in your application. This little 90-day head start. So many hard questions. Okay, so members of the church have their real name, the name of the social security number they used to work, and employers call for a reference. How should the pastor answer the question? Well, I think that if an employer is just calling to ask for a reference, like a personal reference, I don't think you have to offer any information. I mean, this is not ethical, but this is a difficult, it's not illegal, well, and it's not really, I mean, you're not hiring that person, so you're not falling under the INA. You don't have a responsibility to report under the INA, under the Immigration and Nationality Act. You're not required to report an undocumented individual, so you're not required by that law to tell that employer. But I think it's a whole issue of just being honest in what questions they're asking, and that's, you know, something that I think you have to just sort of you know, I don't know, that's such a hard one, Wayne. But anyway, I think that, yeah, I think, but under the INA, you're not required to report. So I'll just leave it there. Okay, so it says, how long does it take and what's the basic process of becoming a recognized and accredited staff person by the Board of Immigration and Appeals? So we have an attorney here, her name is Courtney Tootie, and she is the one who handles all of our Board of Immigration Appeals questions and issues. So if you contact us, we can get you in touch with her, and she can answer that question. There's time for training, and there's a lot of training involved and a lot of documentation that's involved in the application process. And it also depends on how much experience you have with immigration already. That really dictates how long it takes to apply for that. So it's not a quick thing. It's going to be months, 6, 8 months process, depending on how much training you need, how much experience you have. So if you send us an email to religiousworker@wr.org, we'll connect you to Courtney, and she can help you think through that. Yes, absolutely. So we're recording this webinar, and it will be available. So we're going to try to get it up somewhere where you can access it easily. But yes, it's being recorded. Okay. Well, thank you guys so much for participating, and I think we had a lot of specific case questions about particular people's circumstances, so we'd really like to help you with that. So feel free to call us and email us your concerns or Skype. If you want to Skype, just send us an email and give us your Skype name, and we'll set up an appointment, and we'll do it via Skype. So thank you so much to everybody for participating, and please be in touch if you have any questions or concerns, and we'll get some additional information out to you that we refer to during this webinar. So thank you, everybody, and have a great rest of your week.